actually a new presentation for me, so I've never given this talk before, so I'm excited to see where it goes, and I invite you to ask questions for clarification during the discussion, and we can talk more about specifics of that. So first, I just want to point out, so many of you know me through my work with the student public interest research groups, the student firms, where I was for 7 years working with students across the U.S. to advocate for affordable textbooks and open educational resources. And just this summer, I transitioned to SPARC, the Scholarly Publishing and Academic Resources Coalition. I can now say that without tripping over myself. Which is an advocacy organization that works on promoting a more open system of scholarly communication. And in the U.S. is the leading group working on open access to scholarly research, and has done a lot of great work both in the policy and campus arenas, organizing libraries to work with faculty and set up systems to support open access initiative. Is now expanding into open educational resources, and this summer brought me on board to develop a program for OER that will be split between policy, focus on policy, and focus on organizing campuses and libraries across the country to provide grassroots support for OER. So I'm very excited, thrilled, and excited for SPARC to become a partner in the OER movement. So we're talking about policy here today, and I wanted to start out with some basic vocabulary, some words that you may find come up in policy discussions. So first, just a definition of the word policy. It's any set of rules, protocols, principles that concern, that lay out a pathway for decision-making and action. And examples of policies are obvious: laws, priorities, funding priorities, privacy policies you find on the website, anything like that. And it sets forth essentially a pattern for making decisions on certain things. When we use the word forum, it means the system in which a policy is going to operate. So can anybody give an example of a forum for policy? Federal government? Any others? UN, great.
States.
States.
School boards.
Yeah. So others, the institutional level, corporate, consortial, lots of different forums, and you always want to know what your forum is. And then the term decision maker, it's a person that is either in a role to decide on the creation of the policy or how it's implemented. And that includes legislators, Secretary of Education, boards of directors, anybody like that. And then the last piece that's really important is stakeholders. So those are the people that are going to be affected by the policy. And you need to know who your stakeholders are. So with open educational resources, we have faculty, students, colleges. Those are the big ones. So the OER policy movement has been active for over 10 years. And I want to go over kind of what exists in the playing field right now. And I'm not going to go through every single policy in existence because that wouldn't be a good use of our time, but I do want to break them down into categories, and I came up with 4 categories, and it'll be interesting to see if you guys come up with other categories that maybe these policies don't fit into. So the first and probably most visible is resource allocation, allocating resources to either the creation or the adoption of OER or both. Great examples of that include Poland recently invested a bunch of money to develop open textbooks as part of their digital schools initiative, which is a K-12 focused project. They wanted to really move their schools into the 21st century and decided that putting an open license on the materials they developed would be in the best interest of the student. So they'll be using the CC BY license. Another one that we've been hearing about a lot is the TACT program. So I was talking with Nick yesterday. I'm going to challenge myself to actually know what that acronym stands for. It's the Trade Adjustment Assistance Community College and Career Training Grants Program. And I have been at panels with members of the Department of Labor who messed that up. But anyway, it's an awesome grant program, $2 billion invested in it, and it was authorized by a piece of legislation kind of broadly to support workforce training, and then the Department of Education took that opportunity to write the actual grant solicitation for proposals, including a requirement that if you take one of these grants, you need to license any educational materials you develop for workforce training under a Creative Commons attribution license, so that can be shared with the public. And the idea behind it is that the public is investing all of this money to develop better workforce training. So shouldn't the public have access to the deliverables of those grants? So this is I think we said yesterday, the single largest investment in OER right now. And it's the first round of grantees are going to be finishing up their projects within the next year. So we'll start to see the actual OER coming out of that soon. Another notable resource-focused policy is the California Open Textbook Bill that passed last fall, funding the development of 50 textbooks for 50 high enrollment courses in the state of California. And so moving on to the next category in terms of inserting open licensing into systems that are already producing educational resources. So there are a lot of different pathways for producing educational resources that already exist. Professors create them through their teaching. School systems contract with instructional designers to create educational resources. And why don't we repurpose those systems to produce OER? So notable examples there, the Washington State Board of Community and Technical Colleges in 2010 adopted a policy saying that any competitive grants that go to the chancellor's office or the state office would need to be, any outcomes of that would need to be open licensed. So we're not saying you have to take our money, but if you do take our money, it has to be open licensed. And California, this is very exciting recently, the Community College Chancellor's Office recently adopted a similar policy saying that any grants or contracts to develop educational materials for the Chancellor's Office should bear an open license and using the Creative Commons attribution license. And again, it's a public institution. A lot of the money that they're using is in fact state taxpayer dollars. So if educational resources are being developed through those taxpayer dollars, shouldn't the outcomes of those educational resources be made available to the public? The third category of open OER policies is what I'm calling inducements. So anything where it's endorsing or calling for activities that will ultimately lead to engagement with OER. So a few examples, I talked about this one in the session I was just at before. The Foothill De Anza Community College District in California adopted a policy in 2004 around what they called at the time public domain educational materials, because the term open educational resources really wasn't widely used by them, or at that point. And basically what it says is first that we as a community college district support faculty in the use of OER and encourage you to do it. And then two, that the chancellor is required to make periodic reports to the board of directors telling us what the system is doing to implement OER. So not requiring anything, but merely saying we support this. And between 2004 and 2007 and 2008, the Foothill De Anza Community College District became a national leader in open educational resources. They helped form the Community College Consortium for Open Educational Resources, CCC-OER, another ridiculous acronym, and which now is, I think, on 200 campuses across the country. But very, very influential project, and to this day is using OER and has saved students into the millions on textbook cost of use of OER. And it all traces back to this policy of merely asking for reporting and asking, just stating support. Another example in this category is a pair of resolutions the North Dakota legislature passed last year, or earlier this year. which my current colleague, former coalition partner Nick Shockey, did most of the heavy lifting on. And what these two resolutions do. So first is that they call, the first one calls on the state to do a study on the use of open textbooks. So we think this is a good idea. We want you to study. So again, not telling anybody they have to do anything, but asking them to take a look at it and understand what it is and figure out, is this something that we can use in our system? Every task force that looks at this comes out with a yes. And the second one urges the public universities and their faculties to look into open textbooks as a cross-state measure. So these are, just passed this year, but we've already seen memos coming out of the system offices talking about the implementation of them and how open textbooks can be used in these schools. So the final one I want to talk about in this category is a student government resolution passed by the University of Minnesota Graduate Student Council. Alfonso Santiago was the author of that resolution. So actually, Alfonso, you want to say a few words about it?
Well, we started with the Graduate and Professional Student Assembly, and then from there we shared that resolution with the undergraduate student body as well, and got that for the undergraduate students as well to support it. And then we work with other universities also in Minnesota, the municipal system as well. And we promoted that legislation both at state level and also through the University of Minnesota system. So that included the University Senate and the Faculty Senate, and just trying to gain support, but also, and we're still in that process. So they supported some aspects of it, and we're still trying to get more support for us.
Yeah, but it's just a great example of something that a student government or faculty senate can do to elevate the visibility and just put your support behind the idea of OER. The final category of open policies is those that remove existing policy barriers that get in the way of the use or creation of OER. And this is a category that I can't come up with any good examples of where a policy barrier has been removed yet. But two of the ones that I hear come up a lot are contracts that with the campus bookstore that interfere with faculty using open textbooks because they say they have the exclusive right to sell digital textbooks through the bookstore, even though students aren't actually buying open textbooks. Bookstores have been leveraging this to shut down the use of open educational resources. And then the second one is procurement laws in K-12 education that, for purposes of preventing bribery, don't allow the acceptance of free resources. So with open textbooks, that has been raised as an issue in some school districts and states. Can anybody else give me other policy barriers that I don't have up here that you've confronted, Richard?
We did, at the Virginia Community College system, we were looking at a lot of barriers, and one was on a federal level with financial aid. Because community colleges face this kind of more of a barrier with financial aid than 4 years because of the fraud. There's a lot of fraud, and the populations are a little bit more unstable, and so they don't get their financial aid at our colleges until about 50% of the semester is over, which means they have to go to the bookstore to get credit. They get credited their financial aid. So I don't know what to do about it. I don't know if there's any kind of work on that on a federal level, but having those policies examined in light of OER and some other ways of delivering books would be really helpful, at least for our population.
Great.
Yeah, just as an echo, actually I've run into a lot of instructors who have said there's no way I'm going to use OER because my students are all surviving on Pell Grants, and the Pell Grants prevent them from getting their textbooks anywhere but at the campus bookstore. I've heard that many times.
A question, does anyone know if school districts are locked into exclusive contracts with commercial textbook publishers that block additional resources being used in the classroom?
My expertise is not in K-12 policy. Does somebody else have, do you have the answer to that?
No.
Okay.
Sorry.
My suspicion is, yes, there are cases where that is true.
That's true.
It is true.
Do you consider institutional policies, like human resource policies and tenure and promotion policies, that they don't create explicit barriers, but they certainly create other kinds of inducements that lead away
Yeah, I
from
think
OER production?
that's an excellent example. There's a lot that can be done with tenure and promotion policy. I think that would probably go under the inducement category, rather than saying that that's a barrier, that we could change those to support the use of OER. TJ?
So kind of in this realm is the lack of policy, which sort of serves as a barrier, poor copyright hygiene, really. And that's especially true at the K-12 level. It's probably true in higher ed as well, but every state except the one we're in right now, there is no policy as to, no statewide policy as to what teachers can do with licensing when they create content.
Yeah.
Utah's the only one I know that has a policy that says, if you create something on state dollars, you are explicitly allowed to use CC license. You're encouraged to do so.
Does Washington have that policy?
I don't think they have that policy for K-12. They just have, they have allocation of resources. You can learn more at 1:15 today about those policies if you want. We'll talk a bit about them in detail. But yeah, Washington doesn't have that.
Okay.
Fascinating.
Well, thanks. All right, so thanks for those. I've taken note of them, and when I share out my slides, I will put a note in there of the things that we discussed. I'm not advancing. That's a problem. OER policy registry. Just Google OER policy registry. It's a great resource for looking at sample policies. So I want to spend the rest of the time talking about OER advocacy and just a few tips that I've learned. Am I out of time?
That's not coming from us.
Okay. Are you sure somebody's not subtly trying to tell me to stop talking? In my years of experience in OER advocacy, I just wanted to start with a couple of observations, just for any of you who are going to go back to your various campuses and places of residence thinking about OER advocacy. A couple of points. So one, OER isn't an end in itself, where policy is concerned. It needs to be a solution to a problem. And you need to think about it in those contexts, and you need to advocate for it in that context. So what are some problems that OER solves? Textbook affordability, right? Improving teaching and learning. There are tons of them. So, yeah. Public access to publicly funded resources, making best use of taxpayer dollars, lots of those. The second piece is always work with stakeholders and do that before you introduce a policy. It's so important to engage the people that are going to be affected by a policy, even if they don't agree with you from the beginning. It's important to reach out, know what their perspective is, so you can go into it with an understanding. And a lot of times the stakeholders are either not going to support it or will end up opposing it, but at least you're on the same page and know what to expect. So I mentioned this before, but the key stakeholders when talking about OER are faculty, obviously, as both authors and teachers, students, other stakeholders that are important that are affected by OER policy.
Administrator.
Yep. Colleges, bookstores, publishers. And then the third and final tip is just to keep things simple. Most people don't know what OER is and don't know what open textbooks are or why that is different than free and how that is important. So I want to just put up on the screen a sample message for talking about OER that I found particularly effective. So starting out, OER free online academic materials, textbooks, research articles, study guides, and the like that are openly licensed for everybody to use. Students can download and print OER, and professors can tailor and share them. With OER, students have access to the high-quality materials they need to complete their college education at a fraction of the cost of traditional textbooks and educational materials. So that's something that most people can actually understand. This is the kind of language to use when advocating for OER. Jargon to avoid, don't use the term OER. Spell it out. Educational resources. Important. Don't say CC BY. Nobody knows what that is. Don't even say Creative Commons attribution. explain what it is. And the word derivative, I've run into a lot of problems using that word. People don't know what that is. Use adaptation or custom version, or just explain what a derivative is. So I want to spend the last couple of minutes talking about what I'm most excited about in this policy arena moving forward. And I'll go through these quickly, so maybe we'll have a little bit of time for discussion. So first is the just more federal and state money and resources going to the creation and development of open textbooks. Oh, no, that's not what that is, but I'm excited about that too. I'm also excited about more states and institutions developing or accepting policies to condition grants on CC BY licensing. I think there have been positive conversations with the Department of Labor, tons of potential in the Department of Education, so I think that is one of the things that I want to see happen. Lots of opportunities for states to work together to develop open educational resources. We don't need every state to develop every textbook for their own students. With more and more states, and really at this stage, provinces and Canada, I think are outstripping the US so far, coming out with programs to develop open textbooks, the more that we can get them to work together, the better off that we will be. And then finally, I'm really excited about this idea of reporting requirements and getting institutions to just talk about what they're doing with OER. I think that can have a big impact. And then since I'm with Spark now, I just want to give a shout out for open access policy. There's some really cool stuff happening there. So open access means the free, immediate, online availability of scholarly research articles with full reuse rights in the UTCY. And the FASTER Act, Fair Access to Science and Technology Research Act, bipartisan, bicameral legislation. Think how rare that is. Introduced earlier this year that would make a lot of federal research available to the public within 6 months of publication. And also earlier this year, the Obama administration issued a directive to federal agencies asking them to come up with policies to make their research available to the public. And we're currently in the process of finding out what those policies are and working with agencies to make them strong as possible. So with that, I will conclude. I think we have, what, a minute and 30 seconds to,
One question.
One question. Anybody? No questions. Anybody want to share a policy experience that you've been involved with that you should know about?
With OER, does it have to be online resources?
So there are two things that define OER. One is that it has an open license on it. And then two is that it is freely accessible online.
So it has to be accessible online to define it as
No,
OER.
we're not.
The Open Textbook Project in Utah is not necessarily online. You can print this stuff. It has to be freely available.
Or, yeah, freely, sorry. Yeah, it has to be freely available, so no barriers to access.
Online helps.
Right. And the theory is it should be online.
But going from digital to print, but it'd be digital, I'm trying to understand, is it digital as a key component of OER? It's not.
It's a not necessary, but helpful.
It just makes it easier to distribute.
So if you ran across something printed, like one of these open textbooks, see Lula brought up from South Africa or that are here being used in Utah, and you just ran across a copy of it, a hard copy, you could take it and copy it on a photocopier and give it to your friends. It's more expensive.
Of course, yeah, I understand that, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and hopefully there's a digital version that you could share more easily, but no,
Absolutely.
that does not define OER.
Okay, very
It could be
helpful.
online.
I think there could be.
So that's a conversation.
I think
I have
there's
lot
a
with
conversation
people.
there, because I think the point is that it has to have the copyright status that makes it OER,
Oh, yeah.
and it has to be available and distributed, like it has to be out there.
So it's the,
If you're just gonna hide it and behind a paywall, it's not OER.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the UNESCO definition specifies digital, if I'm not mistaken.
Let's thank Nicole for her time and